The sky above the dead planet groaned like a beast in pain as streaks of fire tore through its dark clouds. Ray's ship hit the surface hard. Metal screeched and crumpled as sparks burst out from the ruined hull. He rolled across the floor, hit his shoulder against a broken panel, and stayed there for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the pain catch up to him. Everything smelled like smoke and burned circuits. The emergency lights flickered once and died, leaving him in half-darkness. Outside, the wind howled across the ruins of a long-forgotten battlefield. Craters and rusted wrecks stretched out for miles. This was supposed to be a simple cargo run, but someone had fired on him from orbit. No warning, no message, just a flash of light and then systems crashing down. He was lucky to be alive. Ray dragged himself to his feet, wiped blood from his forehead, and opened the hatch. The planet was colder than expected. Red sand blew across metal debris and broken armor left behind by soldiers who had died here decades ago. He scanned the wreckage of his ship. The communications unit was dead. The engine core was cracked. He needed parts, and fast. Oxygen wouldn't last forever, and neither would the small amount of food packed in the emergency kit. Ray checked the scanner and picked up faint energy signals nearby. It was old tech, but still active. Maybe another wreck, maybe something usable. He grabbed his tools and started walking across the ruins. Half an hour later, he found it. A half-buried bunker hidden behind a collapsed structure. The doors had been forced open, the metal bent and scorched. Cautiously, he stepped inside. The air was thin, but breathable. Lights blinked dimly on the walls. He moved deeper, past fallen beams and shattered crates. Something about this place felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Then he heard it. A low, sharp breath. The click of a weapon being drawn. Ray froze. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. From behind a pile of rubble, a tall figure stepped out. Humanoid, but clearly not human. Skin a dull gray-blue, eyes glowing faintly with an inner fire. She wore torn armor, scorched at the edges, and held a strange blade in one hand. Her other arm hung limply, wrapped in stained cloth. She looked injured, but her posture stayed strong. Her gaze was cold and unblinking. Ray raised his hands. "Look, I'm just here for parts," he said, voice calm but ready to bolt if needed. "I don't care who you are." The alien didn't move. Her eyes scanned him like a machine. Then she said something in her language, harsh, fast syllables. When Ray didn't answer, she repeated in broken standard get. Ray didn't move. "I don't have time for games. I'm not here to fight." The alien took a step closer. Her blade was still raised. Her expression didn't change. "This place is mine," she said again. "You leave or I kill." Ray sighed and lowered his hand slowly. "You're wounded. You won't even last a day if the next storm hits. You think I want to babysit you? You're not my problem." She didn't respond. Her legs shook slightly as she stood, but she didn't show weakness in her face. He could tell she hadn't eaten in days. Her armor looked patched together with scrap. Still, she stared him down like he was the one bleeding. Ray turned away and walked to the far wall. He found an old terminal, half dead, still humming with power. Ignoring her glare, he started working, pulling out wires and salvaging what he could. The silence between them stretched thick and heavy. Every time he moved, he felt her watching. Then he heard the crash. He spun around and saw her standing near his bag. She had pulled out a piece of tech and thrown it against the wall. A small comms relay. Now in pieces. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "I said leave," she growled. "You bring danger, you bring more eyes. That was my only comms relay. You just destroyed the only chance I had of calling for rescue. Not my problem." Ray's temper snapped like a cable under pressure. He stormed toward her, jabbing a finger in her direction. "You think I care about your problems? You think I crashed here just to hold your hand and listen to your paranoia? I don't owe you anything. I didn't shoot you. I didn't lock you in this." Bunker, I didn't destroy this planet, so stop acting like I'm your enemy. She didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, but her blade lowered slightly. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind scraping against metal outside. I am hunted, she said quietly. If they find me, they kill. I don't trust humans. Ray turned away, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, well, I don't trust aliens either. But here we are. So maybe instead of breaking the few things we have left, we try not to die for a while. What a thought, huh? Another silence. Then she slumped against the wall and slid down to sit, breathing hard. The pain in her arm was clearly worse than she let on. Her pride was stronger than her body. Ray sat across from her but didn't speak. The storm outside started to pick up again. A soft rumble echoed through the bunker. Dust drifted from the ceiling. They were trapped together now. Two broken souls from two broken worlds. No escape, no backup, no choice. Ray looked at her again. She was still watching him, as if waiting for him to explode again. He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for a moment. I'm not your babysitter, he muttered under his breath. She didn't understand the words, but something in his tone made her blink. Maybe, just maybe, she realized he wasn't lying, and maybe neither of them wanted to admit they needed each other. To survive, the storm outside raged for hours, with sharp winds that screamed across the wasteland and acid dust that hissed against metal, like angry whispers trying to sneak through the cracks of the bunker. While inside, Ray sat near the broken console with his back against the cold wall, trying to repair what little he had left, and the alien woman named Lyra sat across from him, silent and still like a stone, refusing to show pain, even though it was clear from the way she held her shoulder that the injury was deep and growing worse. He glanced at her more than once, hoping she would say something, hoping she would at least thank him for not leaving her out in the open to die. But she remained quiet, her glowing eyes fixed on the floor, as if she were somewhere else in her mind, somewhere far away from this ruined place. Ray wiped sweat from his face and tried again to connect a power cell to the relay he had pieced together from scraps, but the thing sparked and went dead with a soft crackling noise, which made him throw the tool aside in frustration and mutter under his breath that this whole trip was cursed from the start. She finally spoke, her voice low and rough, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time or had simply forgotten how to talk with softness. You fix it, but no call goes through. They will jam signal, they always. Ray looked up, frowning. And who are they exactly, he asked. The ones chasing you. She looked at him for a long second, as if judging whether to answer, and then slowly leaned back against the wall, her body tense and tired. They are hunters, not for justice, not for war, just silence. They erase anyone who refuses to follow the order. Ray blinked and shook his head. That doesn't tell me much, he said. Are they military? Are they criminals? Are they some twisted government playing God? She gave a small bitter laugh that had no humor in it. They are my own kind, and I broke command. I saw them burn children in the city. I saw them wipe families. From the records, they said it was war. They said it was necessary. I said it was wrong. Ray stopped moving the wires in his hand and stared at her. So you ran? She nodded slowly, and her eyes flicked toward her wrapped arm. They branded me with traitor. Mark, I tore it out, but they still track. He nodded, understanding beginning to take shape in his mind. Now you think every human will turn you in or shoot you on sight? She did not answer, but the way her jaw clenched said enough. Ray leaned back, resting his head against the wall, and let out a long breath. You're not the only one running, he said quietly. I took this cargo job to stay away from people, to stay away from guilt, to keep flying until I forgot the faces of the ones I left behind. He wasn't sure why he said that. Maybe because the silence was too heavy. Maybe because something about her made it easier to speak the truth. Maybe because when you're stuck in a dead bunker with a wounded alien fugitive and no way off the planet, honesty felt like the only thing that still mattered. She didn't speak, but he noticed the way her eyes softened. Just slightly. Not trust, not forgiveness, just the beginning of something, not hatred. They worked in silence for a while, him tinkering with wires, her watching occasionally offering a small gesture or pointing at a tool, and though no words passed between them, something was shifting, like broken pieces starting to fit together in a puzzle too strange to name. When the storm outside finally began to fade, the light returning to a dull gray, Ray stood and stretched his aching limbs. "We need food and more power cells," he said. "The bunker won't last much longer, and if we're going to try sending a signal, we'll need to boost it." From the tower ruins up north, she stood slowly, wincing as her arm throbbed, but she didn't complain. She just adjusted the torn armor and nodded her head once they stepped outside together, the wind now weaker, but still biting the red dust sticking to their boots as they moved through the graveyard of machines and twisted metal that littered the planet's surface. Along the way they found old rations sealed in a container, crushed between two fallen ships, and Ray handed her the first pack even though he was starving too, because something inside him refused to let her starve in front of him. And she hesitated but took it and ate with quiet dignity, as if it hurt her to accept help. But she did it anyway. They reached the old tower before nightfall, its frame leaning at an angle, like it might fall at any moment, and the base of it was partially collapsed, but there was still enough structure left to climb in place. The signal booster. As Ray worked at the console beneath the tower, Lyra kept watch, her eyes scanning the horizon, her blade ready, and her posture tight like a soldier waiting for the moment of attack. Then she stiffened and turned sharply toward the east. "Something is coming," she said. Ray stopped working and looked up. "You sure?" She didn't answer with words, just pointed, and he saw it too, a faint glimmer, a flash of blue light, moving fast low to the ground like a drone or a scout unit. Without thinking, he grabbed the tools, shoved them into his pack, and signaled for her to run. They ducked into a nearby crater, covered themselves with a half-buried sheet of metal, and waited. Breath held, hearts racing as the drone passed overhead, scanning the area with beams of light and soft mechanical hums before continuing on its path. They stayed hidden long after it was gone, neither of them speaking, the silence full of unspoken questions and rising tension. Finally, Ray looked at her. "They found you, didn't they?" She nodded slowly, and her voice was low. "They never stop once they mark you. They never stop." Ray looked at the sky, then at her, then back at the path they had taken. "We need a new plan." Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "It will come in force next time. No scout, just fire." Ray tightened the straps on his gear and met her gaze without blinking. "Then we fight back together." She blinked once, not expecting that answer. "You are human. Why help?" He shrugged. "Because I'm tired of running, because I'm tired of pretending. I don't care, because maybe if I help you, I can start forgiving myself for a moment." Her expression softened just a little, not a smile, not trust, but something close to respect. "Then we fight," she said, and in that moment, without saying it out loud, both of them knew that from now on their fates were tied together, not by choice, not by friendship, but by survival in a growing fire inside them that refused to be extinguished. The sky turned darker by the hour, and the old sun of this broken world sank behind the ruined hills, its fading light casting long shadows across the wrecked battlefield, and the cold wind carried the scent of metal and dust through the air. As Ray crouched near the bunker entrance, tightening the last of the traps with steady hands, while Lyra stood behind him, silent, watching every movement, with her glowing eyes scanning the horizon with the focus of someone who had spent years being hunted by enemies that never slept. They had returned to the bunker after spotting the scout drone, and neither of them said much during the long walk back, their minds heavy with what was coming. Both of them knew what it meant when a scout showed up first. It meant others were on their way, bigger, stronger, more dangerous than anything they had faced. So Ray adjusted the motion sensor near the collapsed wall and set the trigger line to connect with the salvaged power cell he'd wired to a makeshift shock trap. It wasn't elegant, wasn't military standard, but it would hurt anyone who stepped too close, and maybe that would buy them time. Lyra spoke finally, her voice low and steady. "They will not come in peace. They do not offer surrender. They erase everything and leave nothing." Ray looked at her and nodded. "Then We make sure they don't get what they came for. He had always been a man who avoided war, who preferred machines over people, who took the long way around a problem if it meant staying alive. But now here he was building weapons out of scraps beside an alien. He barely knew getting ready to fight off professional killers, and all because something in him refused to leave her behind. He didn't understand it fully. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was pride, maybe it was just that deep human instinct to protect someone once they stopped feeling like a stranger inside. The bunker they laid out, what little they had too small. Energy rifles low on charge, a handful of sharp tools, some broken armor plates, and the most dangerous item of all, their shared desperation to survive. Ray stood over the makeshift table and thought back to the years he had spent drifting from one outpost to another, taking small jobs fixing broken systems, pretending that his past didn't weigh on him, pretending that the screams from his last real mission didn't still echo in his sleep. And now as he watched Lyra brace herself with one good arm and tie her hair back with a strip of cloth torn from her cloak, he felt something shift inside him again, something old waking up, something he had buried long ago. He broke the silence with a question that had been hanging in the air between them for hours. What happens if they catch you? Lyra looked at him and answered without emotion. They take me back to the core. They put me in the silence chamber, and the world forgets I ever lived. Ray stared at her and shook his head slowly. That's not happening, not while I'm still breathing. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she stayed quiet and instead began checking her blade for cracks, wiping it clean with a care that came from years of survival and practice. The first explosion came in the middle of the night, a sudden blast that shook the walls and sent dust falling from the ceiling. Ray jumped to his feet and rushed to the entrance, weapon raised, eyes sharp, heart pounding with fire. Outside, the night sky burned with streaks of blue light, 3 dropships descending through the clouds, engines humming with deadly grace, their sleek shapes cutting through the darkness like shadows of doom. "They're here," he said through gritted teeth. Lyra joined him, blade in hand, her face unreadable but her posture tense with purpose, her eyes narrowed on the incoming ships, as if counting their weaknesses, as if planning a dozen ways to kill them before they ever touched the ground. Ray moved quickly, activating the traps and securing the fallback routes, while Lyra climbed the outer wall and positioned herself in the sniper nest with one of the rifles cradled in her arm. Despite the injury, despite the pain, she did not hesitate. The bounty squad landed with precision, soldiers in black armor stepping out with synchronized movement, weapons glowing with deadly power, and helmets hiding their faces behind emotionless glass. Ray crouched behind cover, watching them move closer, each one scanning with advanced sensors, looking for heat signatures or movement. He knew the traps would not stop them for long, but they only needed a little time. One good push, one moment of chaos, and maybe they could turn the tide. The first soldier triggered the trap near the west wall, and the energy burst hit with a flash, sending him flying back into the sand, his armor sparking from the shock. That was the signal Ray needed. He opened fire from behind the engine wreck and hit the second soldier square in the chest, knocking him off balance before ducking away as return fire blasted the rock beside him into sharp fragments. Lyra picked off a third with a precise shot to the visor, cracking it open with a pulse of blue light, then rolled down from the ledge just before another blast shattered her perch, the shockwave sending debris in all directions. The battle was fast, brutal, messy, soldiers flanking from every side, pushing hard, trying to box them in. Ray moved through the ruins like a ghost, setting off smaller charges, throwing smoke grenades, creating confusion and shadows where none existed, while Lyra fought with speed and fury, slicing through armor with her blade and using every broken piece of metal around them as cover or weapon. They worked like they had trained together for years, watching each other's backs, calling silent warnings through hand signs, sharing a rhythm that could only come from desperation and trust built in the fire of survival. Even that could not last forever. Ray took a blast to the side and hit the ground hard, his breath knocked out, pain flaring through his ribs. He tried to rise, but another figure stood over him, weapon raised, cold and final. Then Lyra was there, throwing herself between them, her blade catching the blast. As she slammed the soldier backward, with a scream of rage and pain, her body shielding Ray from the death blow, he stared up at her, blood running down her side, breathing heavy, eyes fierce and full of something he had never seen in her before. Not hatred, not anger, but something deeper, something almost human. She helped him to his feet without a word, and together they made their last stand side by side, as more soldiers poured into the bunker, light and sound and fire filling the night, until everything blurred. But when the dust settled, when the last shot was fired, when the enemy finally withdrew, leaving behind their dead and their broken pride, Ray and Lyra still stood back to back, weapons, smoking bodies, bruised hearts pounding with defiance. And in that silence that followed the storm, Ray looked at her and laughed once, just once, dry and short. "Still not your babysitter," he said with a grin. She gave a slow nod, and for the first time since they met, she smiled, a real small, quiet smile. "Maybe now you are something else," she said, and neither of them spoke again as they began preparing for what came next, knowing this was far from over, but also knowing that together they had already done the impossible. The fires from the battle still smoldered across the ruined ground as smoke rose into the dim sky, but the air had grown quieter. The threat had pulled back for now, and both Ray and Lyra sat inside the damaged bunker, breathing heavily, their bodies aching from the fight, and their minds swirling with everything they had just survived. Ray leaned against the cold wall, pressing a cloth to his side, where the blast had scorched through his jacket and skin, the pain sharp with every breath. But he didn't complain. He just looked at the weapon in his hand, then across the room at Lyra, who sat in silence, holding her shoulder again, blood slowly seeping through the wrapped cloth, but her face calm as if the pain didn't matter anymore. She was staring at the floor, unmoving, her blade lying beside her, and for the first time since they met, her posture had lost that tension, that sharp edge of defense and pride. It was like something inside her had cracked, not from fear or defeat, but from something deeper. Ray watched her in silence for a moment, then spoke quietly. "You saved me back there." She didn't answer right away. Her voice came slow and hollow when she finally did. "Should have left you. There would have been easier, safer." "But you didn't," he replied without judgment. She looked up at him, then her glowing eyes meeting his tired human gaze, and something passed between them. Not a smile, not warmth, but a kind of recognition. Two people broken in different ways, but standing on the same ground. "I was taught never to trust humans," she said softly. "They say your kind lies, manipulates, steals what is not yours. But you stayed, you fought beside me. You didn't run, even when you had the chance." Ray gave a small, bitter laugh. "Humans lie a lot," he admitted. "We make mistakes, we ruin things, we get scared and selfish. But sometimes we do the right thing too. Sometimes we stand when it matters, even if no one tells us to." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment and leaned her head back against the wall, the smoke drifting in through the cracks in the ceiling, painting shadows across her face. "They killed my sister," she said, in a voice barely more than a whisper. "The hunters, they came for me, but she stood in my place, took the blame, bought me time to run. They burned her alive in the square, and I couldn't do anything. I just watched from the rooftops while they silenced her, like she was nothing." Ray said nothing, but his jaw tightened and his hands clenched into fists. He understood that kind of loss too well, though he had never spoken it aloud. "I had a team once," he said quietly. "We were supposed to extract civilians from a hostile zone. Bad intel, wrong coordinates. Everything went wrong, and I froze. I hesitated when I should have acted, and 3 of them died because of me. I walked away with a medal in nightmares. I threw the medal into a trash chute and joined the cargo fleet, so I wouldn't have to look anyone in the eye again." Lyra looked at him, not with pity, but with understanding, the kind that only comes from having carried guilt for too long. "We both ran from our ghosts," she said. Ray nodded. "Yeah, but maybe it's time we stop running. Maybe it's time we face them outside." The wind began to rise again. The soft sound of static in the air meant another storm was coming, and Ray stood slowly moving To check the beacon one last time. He had rewired it after the last wave of damage, but its signal was weak, flickering against the broken tower above. "We've got one shot at this," he said. "If we boost the signal during the storm's magnetic pulse, it might reach the orbit channel. Someone out there might hear it. Maybe a passing ship, maybe a rescue unit. If they hear it, and the hunters hear it too," Lyra asked. "Then we have to move fast," Ray replied. "One of us has to take the escape pod. The other has to stay behind and make sure the signal keeps running." She stood beside him, now her wounds forgotten, her eyes locked on the same blinking light that represented their last fragile hope. "You mean one of us lives, the other dies?" Ray didn't answer right away. He looked out at the dying sky, at the land littered with bones and fire, then back at her, and his voice was steady. "I came here with a ship and cargo, nothing more. I leave with nothing, and no one waiting for me out there. But you still have a voice, a story that needs to be told. You still have a fight worth finishing." Her jaw tightened. "I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me, and I'm not asking for permission," he said calmly. "I'm just telling you what makes sense." She stepped closer, her voice sharp, now almost angry. "You are not a hero. Do not try to die like one." Ray smirked just a little. "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to do one thing right before it's over." The storm hit just before nightfall, and they both worked together, connecting the beacon to the power core using wires and boosters, and a dozen patched-together pieces of old tech sparks flew every time they tested the connection. But it held together barely as the sky cracked with lightning, and the pulse began. Ray handed her the escape module key and turned back to the console, but Lyra didn't move. She just stared at the key, then at him. "You are the worst kind of fool," she said. "They've been called worse." She looked like she might argue again, but instead she stepped forward and without a word wrapped her good arm around his shoulder just once, quick and firm, and before he could respond, she turned and sprinted toward the pod, vanishing into the firelight of the storm. Ray watched her go, then turned back to the signal as the console blinked alive and the static turned to a solid green pulse. His hands flew over the controls, locking the channel, activating the emergency flag, and feeding every last bit of power into the boost behind him. The wind screamed louder, the earth shook, and far in the distance he saw the glow of enemy ships returning. They were coming again. One last wave to finish the job. Ray stood tall, gripping the tool in his hand like a weapon, breathing in the smoke and fire and dust, and though his body trembled with pain, his eyes burned with something stronger than fear. Somewhere far above, the stars waited, holding their breath for the answer to his call. The storm roared above the bunker, lightning flashing across the sky like veins of fire as winds howled through the broken towers and scorched ground, while Ray stood inside the wrecked control room, pressing his hands to the signal console, keeping it stable as the beacon blinked and pulsed, pushing out its message again and again into the dark, hoping that somewhere someone would hear it outside. Engines screamed louder this time, closer than before, and from the window, Ray could see the black shapes of enemy crafts approaching low and fast, cutting through the thick storm with clear intention. They were not scouting, now they were hunting, and they were coming for him. No more delay. No more time to think. They were going to finish what they started. His hand trembled from pain, his side burning from the earlier blast, but he stayed standing, stayed focused, stayed alive because he had promised her she would get out, because she was already in the escape pod, heading for orbit with the hope of a future clutched tightly in her hands. And he was not going to let that hope burn with him in this tomb of war and metal. The ground shook as the first blast hit the edge of the structure, debris falling from the ceiling and dust rising like smoke from ancient ashes. He grabbed the emergency trigger from his belt and activated the last of the traps outside. One by one, old energy cells exploded near the entrance, sending shockwaves into the wind and slowing their advance. But it would not stop them, not for long. Ray leaned over the console and activated the final sequence, sending the beacon into overload mode, forcing it to burn at maximum strength for just a few final bursts. The tower shook, the wires sparked, the screen cracked, but the signal went out strong and steady, a clean wave of light and sound across the emptiness of space, one last cry for help from a dying planet. Turned then, ready to face the storm outside, ready to hold the line even, if just for another minute. But something unexpected happened in that moment. The beacon responded not with static, not with silence, but with a clear signal bouncing back a ship nearby, a human code, a real response. Not just hope, not just noise. His eyes widened as the console flashed green, and a voice came through, broken, but real. A rescue vessel picking up the signal, confirming location, requesting visual confirmation of survivor identity. Ray laughed, then dry and breathless, and full of disbelief and relief all at once. But before he could answer, another explosion rocked the walls and fire burst through the doorway, enemy troops swarming into the room, weapons raised, shouting orders in a language he didn't speak but had learned to hate. He dove for cover behind the shattered table and fired back with his last charge. The shot hit the first one clean, but the others kept coming. He rolled sideways, dodging the blast as energy scorched the floor behind him, his breathing heavy, his hands shaking from the effort of simply holding on. Then came another sound, a deep roar from the sky above, and this time it was not enemy ships but something else, something stronger. The rescue vessel had arrived, and it opened fire from the air, sending beams of white energy crashing into the enemy ranks, scattering them in every direction, breaking their formation with perfect precision. Ray stumbled out of the building, waving his arms toward the sky, smoke rising around him as the ship descended with its lights cutting through the storm like a blade. The rear hatch opened, and two armored figures jumped down, pulling him up into their arms, without asking questions, dragging him aboard. As blasts rained down behind them, the door closed. The engines lifted and the ground below shrank away until it was only ruins and ash and distant flames, and then it was gone, and Ray collapsed onto the floor of the rescue ship, blood running down his arm, pain screaming in his ribs, but a smile forming slowly on his face, because he had done it, because she had gotten away, because he had not died alone and forgotten in the dirt. He blacked out after that, and when he woke up next, he was in a clean white medical bay with soft lights and humming machines and the sound of air not poisoned by dust or fire. And across from him, standing at the window, looking out into the stars, was Lyra, alive, unharmed, watching the void with quiet calm. He sat up slowly, and she turned toward him, her eyes meeting his with something he couldn't quite name, not gratitude, not pity, not even relief, but something like understanding, something like peace. "You made it," he said, voice dry but steady. She nodded once and walked over to him, her steps light but firm. "You called for help even though they were coming for you," she said. "You stayed behind even when you knew it would mean death." Ray shrugged slightly and leaned back against the bed frame. "You needed to live. Someone had to make it off that rock, and I figured I had less to lose." She sat beside him and looked down at her hands for a moment, then at him again. "We're wrong," she said quietly. "You had something to lose, you just didn't believe it." Until the end, he didn't know how to answer that, so he just closed his eyes for a second, breathing in the clean air and letting the silence settle. The crew entered after a while and gave them the basic update. The hunters had retreated. The planet was now marked for lockdown. No one else would land there again. The rescue ship was heading toward the nearest Alliance station, and from there their paths would likely split. Ray didn't say anything for a long time, just watched the stars pass by outside the window, watched the endless black stretch out like a canvas for all the things he had never done, all the choices he had never made, all the lives he had touched without meaning to. Lyra stood near the door, preparing to leave the room, but she paused before stepping out and looked at him once more, her voice soft but clear. "You are not my babysitter," she said. Ray gave a tired grin. "Good, because you were the worst guest I've ever had." But in his eyes and in hers, there was something more than sarcasm, something that said the bond they had formed in fire and pain would not fade with distance or time. And as the ship flew on through the stars, Ray closed his eyes again, knowing he had faced his past, knowing he had saved more than one life, knowing that for the first time in years he didn't feel like running anymore. The War was not over. The galaxy was still full of shadows, but for now there was peace, and that was enough. The end.